Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, The Road Ahead for Clean Energy. We are honored to have Keith Martin and Jigar Shah joining us today for a wide-ranging discussion on clean energy finance and a particular focus on policy as well. Some very quick housekeeping. We will be recording the webinar. There's been a lot of demand to hear what these two gentlemen have to say, and so we are recording this one, and we'll distribute it after the call. We have disabled participant chat, but if you have any questions for us at all, please feel free to drop it in the chat, and we will try to get to questions towards the end of the presentation. If you have any issues with the connectivity, feel free to email dennis@reunioninfra.com. Next slide. So, all right. So why don't we kick off with a quick set of introductions. My name is Andy Moon, co-founder and CEO of Reunion, and I'll be moderating the panel today. Reunion works with major corporations to purchase clean energy tax credits, and in 2024, we facilitated over $3.5 billion worth of tax credit transfers. In February of this year, we also launched a software product to help developers comply with prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements, which has started to become a major pain point for developers starting at the end of 2024. I'm also a proud SunEdison alum, a company that Jigar started many moons ago. And so it's particularly exciting to welcome Jigar Shah to the conversation today. We are truly coming full circle. So with that, I'll let Jigar give an introduction to himself.
Great to be here. And most recently was the head of the Loan Programs Office at the Department of Energy. And today I'm a podcaster, the Open Circuit podcast. So excited for that to be back. And then was one of the three co-founders of Generate Capital before that. And then, as you suggested, started SunEdison in 2003. And, was a nonprofit guy in the middle there with Richard Branson and the Carbon War Room. So been an exciting career so far.
Thanks, Jigar. And over to you, Keith.
Hi, guys. Andy, thanks for having me. I'm co-head of the projects group at Norton Rose Fulbright, a large British firm that goes back to 1794. I've run that group for almost 30 years now. I'm in Washington.
Thank you, Keith. We'll quickly go over the agenda for today on the next slide. So we will kick it off with a couple of slides. Keith has a very hotly anticipated presentation on what's new in policy and tax. I think Keith had to rewrite that perhaps this morning based on all of the frequent changes happening with the administration. And so we will start with about a 10-minute presentation on what's new and then shift over to our discussion with the three of us. Before we get started, I will make a couple of announcements on the next slide. We actually spent the last few months crunching a lot of our data from the Reunion transactions database and also doing in-depth interviews with a large number of tax leaders at very large corporations. And just as of yesterday, we launched a new report called Transferable Tax Credits in 2025, the buyer perspective. That's available for download on our website. And I'll just go over a couple of very quick conclusions from that research. Next slide. I think the good news is, despite the political uncertainty that we'll talk about today, the good news is that buyers are very much looking to purchase credits in 2025. We are seeing some of the largest corporations in America focused on purchasing these credits. And I'd say we're much busier than we were at this point 1 year ago. Close to 85% of buyers have indicated that they plan to purchase more or the same volume of credits in 2025 compared to 2024. Next slide. A general trend we've seen is that once buyers decide that they want to purchase clean energy tax credits, they tend to go all in. Over 50% of buyers we talked to indicated that they do plan to purchase the legal maximum of tax credits. And approximately 85% are looking to offset over half of their tax liabilities. Next slide. So finally, just to give a taste of some of the more interesting conclusions from the report, buyers are continuing to place a very high premium on what they perceive as high quality tax credits. And over 60% of buyers mentioned they're willing to pay at least 1 to 2 cents extra from credits from investment grade sellers. And that holds true for both production tax credits as well as for investment tax credits. And we have seen some of the investment tax credits trade at surprisingly high pricing when the seller is investment grade. For more insights, you can feel free to download that report on our website. Again, it's free. And with that, I'll hand over the mic to Keith to talk about what's new.
Okay, Dennis, next slide. So I prepared these slides at 11 o'clock this morning. I've learned my lesson. When I've prepared slides the night before, they're already out of date in this Trump era by the middle of the next day. Here's something I'm not going to talk about, surprisingly. Trump having imperialist aims against Canada, Greenland, Panama, the price of eggs, all of these things are big issues, but there is so much else happening. Next slide. Number one item is just the chaos around tariffs is making it challenging to commit to new equipment procurement contracts and to supply electricity long term. No one knows what products will cost in this era. New aluminum and steel tariffs took effect today. Steel tariffs are moving to 25%. They were already at that level, but what has changed is exemptions have been swept away, and some downstream products that use steel will now be subject to tariffs. Aluminum tariffs are moving from 10% to 25%. Trump is teasing potentially more disruptive reciprocal tariffs on April 2. These are tariffs that would match all sorts of things in foreign countries, value-added taxes, sales taxes in Canada, digital services taxes, subsidies, just anything that the Trump administration views as causing an unlevel playing field, exchange rates, things like this. There are two other dates that people in Washington are watching. Tomorrow is a key date for federal workers. The agencies are supposed to turn in plans for massive reductions in force. And then March 28th, later this month, the agencies are supposed to identify contracts and grants that they will try to terminate. Next slide. Usually stabilizers kick in to stave off downturns. The central banks have tools that they usually use. There are other fiscal measures. But the danger this time is the administration is pursuing a short-term contractionary fiscal policy, mass deportations, spending cuts, reductions in force, and driving our trading partners into recessions at the same time that there is stress on our economy. Next slide. Efforts in Congress to roll back the Inflation Reduction Act have been largely on hold this month while Congress deals with a looming federal shutdown. The government is scheduled to shut down at the end of the day on Friday unless new funding is approved. The House voted yesterday for a stopgap funding bill that would fund the government through the end of the current fiscal year, September 30. That bill heads to the Senate. The House has already left on recess for 10 days. The Senate will need 8 Democrats to vote for it in order to pass. The Democrats have been pretty tight-lipped, including after their lunch yesterday about what the strategy of that caucus is. They need 8 because one Republican, Rand Paul, has already said he'll vote against it. Next slide. Any rollback of the Inflation Reduction Act would have to be done through a budget reconciliation process. Only one bill a year can pass the Senate by majority vote. Other bills require 60 votes. The Republicans have only 53 Senate seats. The House and Senate remain split on tactics and timing for dealing with tax issues. The House wants to deal with taxes and other parts of the Trump program in a massive bill early in the year, but the Senate thinks the tax part of that is too difficult and wants to kick it to the very end of the year in a second reconciliation bill in October, November, December this year. Next slide. Reconciliation is a multi-step process. The two houses are stalled currently. The House passed a budget resolution which I'll come back to. The Senate passed a different one. They can't agree. This is the easy part of the process. The process really can't get rolling until they agree on the top line numbers. Next slide. Republicans face a daunting challenge. The House budget resolution calls for $1.5 to $2 trillion in spending cuts over the 10-year budget window, and then 4.5 trillion in net tax reductions. The extension of the 2017 Trump tax cuts would eat up that entire 4.5 trillion and a little more. So just to give you a sense of the math problem the Republicans face, 86% of the federal budget is defense, interest on the national debt, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. The remaining 14% is only 1 trillion. So if you're trying to cut 1.5 to 2 trillion, you can't do it without taking a whack at some of these other things, and they want to increase defense spending. Next slide. Republicans on the House Tax Writing Committee met behind closed doors on Monday at the Library of Congress. They're resuming today. They're talking about what to do about taxes. The Senate Finance Committee Republicans met separately on Monday, and Trump has just invited them to the White House on Thursday. So people have been wondering whether there will be any leaks out of these meetings. Really, what seems to have happened on Monday is they just went over options. Usually they take a day or two to hear from staff about what's on the table and just get better educated. So it doesn't seem like they're making any decisions at this point. Next slide. Many developers rushed last year to start construction of as many projects as possible by year-end 2024. Those projects should be insulated from any rollbacks of tax credits this year, but they have to be completed within 4 years after the year construction started. Next slide. There are lots of developers who are besieging law firms for help to start construction this year on other projects. They need to try to start before the tax bill starts rolling. Under the U.S. Constitution, taxes bills have to originate in the House. So they really need to start before the House Ways and Means Committee first votes on the tax revisions to fold into the reconciliation bill. That isn't expected until sometime in April at the earliest. Next slide. Anyone starting construction this year is basically betting on what Congress will do with the tax credits and how it will structure any transition relief. Historically, whenever Congress has withdrawn incentives for people to invest, it has grandfathered projects or taxpayers who have changed their economic positions in reliance on those incentives. It's unfair to pull them away. Next slide. Look for Republicans to start with a full rollback of the Inflation Reduction Act. This is behind closed doors, and then pare it back to see what they have the votes to pass. There are rumors that direct sales of tax credits are on the chopping block, but those rumors aren't surprising given this approach. It would be a good idea, though, to sign any tax credit sale agreements before the first House Ways and Means Committee vote. Next slide.
And Keith, do you expect that vote in April, or do you expect that to happen later in the year?
That would be what happens in these markups is the chairman releases a mark, quote unquote. It's basically an outline of what he wants the committee to approve, and then the committee votes on that immediately. If they leave it out hanging for a few days, the lobbyists just pick it apart. So I think this may be my last point. Financing of projects that were under construction by the end of last year are proceeding normally this year, but financings of projects that were not under construction last year are being slow walked until it's clear what Congress will do on tax credits. I think that's it.
Thanks, Keith. Well, certainly a lot to dig into from those updates. Let me start with a very high-level question for Jigar. Jigar, you have a unique vantage point from your role overseeing tens of billions of dollars of loans through the loan guarantee program, and many of those loans are for projects that will be placed in service in the next couple of years. Can you just talk about a few themes that you've observed or kind of what you see coming down the pike?
Yeah, I mean, we as an industry don't love innovation, right? We love boring, tier one equipment lists and things like that. I think there was a short moment in time here for the last 4 years where a lot of projects that had received D-round financing across nuclear or carbon capture or hydrogen or battery manufacturing, critical minerals, et cetera, were able to get debt financing from the Loan Programs Office, and subsequently, we crowded in over $100 billion worth of equity financing for these projects as well, right? And so for many of these projects that are already under construction, some of them have already completed construction and have already started hiring workers and ramping up, and so those projects are underway. Clearly, I think for the last 60 days or so, there's been a lot of concern around whether these projects will be honored long term. I think, Chris Wright said at CERAWeek this week that all of the loans would be honored, just because I think he recognizes that if any one of them wasn't honored, that nuclear and lots of other priorities for the president, wouldn't be able to move forward. But I do think that, that a lot of the tariff conversations, a lot of the other conversations have just left a bad taste in the mouth for a lot of investors. And so I think, the folks that we crowded into these projects are less enthusiastic around investing in new innovative projects right now.
And Jigar, one follow-up. So there's loans that have already been dispersed, but there's also almost 50 billion in conditional commitments that the DOE has yet to finalize. Can you maybe give a breakdown of what types of technology are represented in those commitments, and what would cause those loans to perhaps not materialize?
Yeah, so for the loans that have already closed, I'd say that they have honored all of the requests for cash that have been submitted. Some of them, maybe 2 weeks later than they expected, but they've honored those to date. For the ones that are conditionally committed that have not yet closed, I mean, there's a lot of advanced fossil projects in there, right? So when you think about the Wabash Valley project in Indiana, or the Monolith Materials project in Halem, Nebraska, that uses natural gas and methane pyrolysis, or DTE, the utility, which is upgrading their natural gas utility, right? And all the methane leaks that are coming out of old pipelines. And so, so I think it'll be interesting to see what they decide to do in terms of closing conditionally committed loans, just because, again, right, being arbitrary and capricious actually leads to a lot of new folks not wanting to use the office. And then we have a lot of, folks who've submitted full loan applications that have not yet been processed, right? And those include, over $60 billion worth of nuclear projects, right? Critical minerals projects, other projects that the president in his recent speech said were priorities for the administration. So again, we'll see if they process them.
And one final question for Jigar, and then over to Keith. In terms of looking at the crystal ball of innovation, what technologies are you most excited about or bullish about coming online in the next 4 or 5 years?
Well, if they're coming online in the next 4 or 5 years, it's all the stuff that we approved, right? I mean, when you look at Monolith Materials, right? I mean, you're talking about a company that already makes carbon black that you can use in tires that, you can buy for Tesla Model 3s right now out of Michelin, right? But similarly, when you think about all the clean fertilizer projects that, we funded, or the, hydrogen storage facility in Delta, Utah, but also, like, I mean, we're on track to being able to manufacture 400 gigawatt hours of EV batteries by, 2027. And we'll, the Lithium Americas project already raised their equity, so they've broken ground in Nevada. So we're on track to being able to export lithium out of our country by 2034. So, I mean, I think when you're talking about a short time frame, like 4 or 5 years, that's all projects that received grants and or loans over the last 4 years.
Keith, any thoughts on newer technologies that will be coming to the market?
I think Jigar's right that in that time frame, you're just talking about things that are already in process. So probably the one truly new technology people are watching is SMRs. How is it a 10-year time horizon, 15-year what? And then I know this MIT backed group announced today that they've made breakthroughs on fusion. We've heard that before, but that's also potentially exciting.
For sure. And let's dig into nuclear just for a moment, because we have seen a lot of 45U credits change hands. How do you see that particular industry playing out? We've heard a lot about modular nuclear reactors to power the data center revolution. We've also heard of kind of old facilities coming back online. How do you see nuclear playing out? Maybe start with Jigar.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, I think 45U is really designed to help keep existing nuclear plants running. And so I think that has firmly occurred. And I think there are no other nuclear plants that people are thinking about prematurely shutting down early. And in fact, I think we were able to keep the Diablo Canyon, a nuclear plant running. There are 3 plants that can be turned back on, right? So that's Palisades in Michigan, which is already under construction. You've got the TMI-2 reactor, which, basically it was only recently shut down. And then you have the Duane Arnold reactor in Iowa that the NextEra CEO has already said that he's planning to restart. So those I think are underway. For new reactors, look, I mean, the problem with nuclear is that there's nobody to push the risk off to, right? So when you think about geothermal, which is another sort of innovative technology, there are EPC contractors that are willing to provide fixed price contracts, right? And so they're willing to take the price risk, right? Obviously, they're making a healthy margin or healthy contingency on that, but they're willing to do that. That's not possible in nuclear, right? So if the hyperscale data center companies want to sign an above market power purchase agreement, and the utilities are saying we will take and rate base that asset at the end of the construction period, which is what Rocky Mountain Power has said, right, in Wyoming, then who's going to take the cost overrun risk, right? And that question still hasn't been answered. And so I think the technologies we have today are great, right? Whether it's GE Hitachi's BWRX 300 or the Holtec 300 or the X Energy reactor or others that, are underway. But, if you can't solve that one big challenge, then my sense is this is going to be an enthusiastic conversation that won't actually have, real construction.
Yep.
I agree with that. We're representing the U.S. government on Vogtle and then on the Palisades restart. These are long, expensive projects. On the geothermal, we have been working on very deep drilling technologies and also using fracking to introduce to geothermal. Those are opening up some new avenues.
And what's the timeline on that, Keith, in terms of these new geothermal technologies coming online?
They're all usable now, but they haven't been proven commercially, and that's always the challenge.
Yeah, I think that's worth mentioning with a lot of these technologies. There are smaller, even with natural gas, there's smaller capacity coming online, but the NextEra CEO was mentioning that meaningful scale capacity won't be online until after 2030.
Right.
Why don't we flip to tariffs, since that's a very topic du jour given the announcements yesterday and today on steel and aluminum tariffs. Maybe starting with Jigar, given what you've seen at the Loan Programs Office. A lot of developers have started building in domestic content plans on structural steel, but at the same time, developers are not known for building in large contingencies on their project plans. So will these tariffs lead to defaults on a lot of projects?
Well, I think defaults are probably a technical term, but I'd say that in general, there's been a clear signal to the solar industry that they needed to find more domestic sources for materials since 2016, right? And the Biden administration certainly was not shy about saying that they also wanted domestic content, right? A lot of those projects didn't come together, right? And so we have module manufacturing that I think equals roughly what we imported last year, that's operating today, roughly 50 gigawatts. But the cells are imported, right? Ingots and wafers and some of those other pieces. And so I think we're going to have to figure that out. On the steel side, Nextracker, I think, has done a pretty good job of onshoring almost all of their production for the U.S. And so have other tracker companies. And look, I think that we're in this weird position where I think for a long time, people thought that the cheapest possible approach was the best approach, right? And I think where we're at now is now that 70% of everything that gets interconnected to the grid every year is solar, people are saying, no, actually, we need something that's more secure, right? That the national security stuff is actually more important than getting the lowest possible price. And I feel like the solar industry in particular, has actually said, that's very nice for you to say, but we're not going to take it seriously. And I think, today they are taking it seriously. They should have taken it seriously in 21 and 22, but they are taking it seriously now. So will it cause disruption to their production and their deployment? Yes, but that was just because they didn't run their businesses well.
Keith, what are you seeing in terms of the impact of tariffs on projects?
We're seeing some minor dislocation so far. Most developers are scouring their equipment procurement contracts to see who bears the risk of the tariff increases. Um, in a few cases, most developers are waiting to sign offtake contracts until the very end of the process, just because it's so hard to lock down costs. And so I don't think there'll be wholesale defaults or just these dislocations in a few cases. Lenders are being a lot more careful about lending to projects unless the equipment is already in the US or there's a plan to cover tariff risk.
Great. Why don't we shift gears and talk about potential changes to the IRA, which I think a lot of our audience is here to hear about. Maybe Keith, building off your presentation, obviously there's many tax credits included in the IRA. Could you give an overview on which are perceived as more safe versus less safe from changes?
Well, let me start with the four that are probably at greatest risk. One is the electric vehicle tax credits. Second is these are parts of the IRA that are at risk. The 80 billion that was provided for the IRS to modernize its computers, that has already been whittled back to 40 billion. The last 20 was taken out in this funding bill the House passed last night. Then third is DOE Loan Guarantee Program. Chris Wright has talked about shifting that focus to fossil and nuclear, but continuing to spend the unallocated money or credit subsidy, whatever it is. And then fourth is the technology neutral tax credits for generating electricity. Those are expected to be scaled back in some fashion, but it may not be a binary outcome, may not be yes, you have them or you don't have them. They could just adjust them so a different group of people qualifies or the amounts are different. As for those that are probably in a better position, there is a push by some people to increase the carbon capture tax credits. 45X, there's been a lot of debate about whether those will survive. That's a credit for making solar storage and wind components and processing critical minerals. There, on the one hand, the Trump group doesn't really like steering capital to just one sector. It's the clean energy sector, so it would have to be broadened. I think those are the two that that are probably on the more safe side, but nothing safe in this environment.
And Keith, one follow-up. So on 45X, we've seen some bipartisan proposals to ensure that sort of foreign entities of concern do not benefit from the green tax credits. Have you seen workarounds for Chinese companies that have planned to build manufacturing facilities in the US and want to make sure they can benefit from the 45X credits?
I've been on calls where we've been trying to figure out structures. Yes, there are solutions, but there are three different definitions the federal government uses for foreign entity of concern, and this could be yet a fourth one. So people need to know exactly what is proscribed, then they'll figure out a way around it. And by way around it, I mean if Chinese ownership is limited to 25% or 10%, they'll comply.
Yep. One other question on the tech neutral credits, which is obviously a big issue. For us that have been on the solar coaster for many years, we've dealt with a lot of ups and downs in terms of potential sunsetting of the PTC and the ITC. We've heard chatter as well of the earlier phase out of credits, but I'm curious, kind of what have you heard more concretely in terms of proposals or kind of what clues do we have about what might transpire there?
None, because nobody knows, no decisions have been made. So this is sort of like a sports call-in show of just people expressing opinions. So I can give you rumors, but we just have to wait.
Well, I think people love hearing the chatter, and are very curious to hear what this collective group's opinion is on the chatter.
One possible outcome is just to return to what the law was before the Inflation Reduction Act. These credits were being phased out. Another one is to start the phase out more promptly than under current law. Under the IRA, it won't start until the mid-2040s on current projections, so you start it more quickly. Another rumor has been that the base credit would be reduced to 6% from 30, and you'd get to 30 if you used enough domestic content.
Thanks, Keith. So on continuing on the theme of speculation, there was this letter from now 21 Republican House members urging the preservation of clean energy tax credits. It wasn't specific on which, but just generally saying that they would support continuing providing tax credits. Jigar, do you think this letter will have any impact on the leadership?
I mean, look, the challenge with these kinds of things is that I think everybody wants it to be logical, and it's most certainly not logical, right? The way this stuff works is you watch the president's approval rating, which has been high, right, but is coming down, right? You saw CNBC go up against the president yesterday. So, like at some point, if the president's approval rating is low, well, then people feel like, they need to separate themselves from the president to get reelected next year, right? And if that's the case, then they withhold their vote, right? And if they think that, the president going after them would actually hurt them, then they would stick with the president, right? The other thing that I would say is that these tax credits are not the reason why someone's going to pass a reconciliation bill, right? They're going to pass a reconciliation bill because they want to extend the Trump tax cuts, right? Or they want to get something else like a larger exemption from, the state tax, loopholes and stuff. And so this is just one issue on 350 issues that are in this bill that they're going to vote for, right? And so I think it's critical that people recognize that this part of the process requires people to be very loud in district, right? I think what's happening too much, in my opinion, is there's too many lobby days in DC, right? Like people need to actually do events in district where your solar farms are, your wind farms are, your battery storage facilities are, et cetera, and introduce people to the folks who work for you in district, right? And say, this is the person that works for me in district and is coaching the T-ball team that your kid plays on, right? That's how this works. And for whatever reason, people have been too lazy to do that in our sector, right? They just think it's easy to fly in with the CEO and meet with 20 members of Congress. That's not going to work. Like you're going to have to go in district and remind people that we actually have over 1 million people that work for our industry.
That's very good advice. Jason Smith, the House Tax Writing Committee chairman, was asked by a reporter about the letter, and he said, "This is the second time I've received this letter." He seemed rather irked. So it's going to come down to whether any of these people will make a particular tax credit, will tie their votes to a particular tax credit. It's not clear. Politico interviewed a number of the letter writer, the people who signed the letter, and all of them just had general thoughts that we ought to be more thoughtful about rolling back the IRA, but they're not standing behind any particular tax credits.
It's great feedback. Jigar, have you seen any in terms of in district, I guess, what are some effective strategies that you've seen? Is it really just solar company mobilizing an event day in front of their facility? And like, how do you get your local electeds sort of to make sure they're in attendance?
Yeah, I don't think this is necessarily something that has to be combative, right? I mean, I just think there's a lot of elected officials in your territory, whether it's city council members, mayors, county commissioners, like people need to be reminded of the fact that you pay property taxes there locally, that folks actually live and work there, right? They forget, right? I just think that people don't really recognize. They're like, well, but I met the member of Congress 3 times. He met 340 companies 3 times. Like, doesn't remember you. Like, and so, like, I just think that in general, people just have to recognize that this stuff requires repetition and friendships, right? I mean, it might even mean that some of the people in your at your company should run for office, right? Run for city council, run for mayor of the local town, run for stuff, right? And people have to support them. Like whenever I find that clean tech people run for office, their smallest fundraiser is their clean tech fundraiser. Even though like they work for that company, right? Like they are the least reliable people to like give them a campaign donation. It's the way this stuff works. Like we deploy $500 billion of CapEx a year. We have something on the order of like double what the oil and gas industry spends on CapEx per year, right? I think the amount of influence spending that we do is about $200 million a year. The influence spending that the oil and gas industry does is about $4 billion a year, right? So we're outspent 20 to 1 on influence spending. I think everyone's like, well, but Jigar, it's so tight, like every penny that I pay for influence, like is like something I don't get out of my project finance structure. I get it, but then like don't cry to me over these credits and all these other things.
Yep, got to play the long-term game. Keith, you talked earlier about the math problem in terms of, the Trump tax cuts requiring, $4.7 trillion worth of cost. Why, given how popular transfers have been in particular, and the fact that it probably doesn't score too poorly on the CBO sort of cost scoring, do you have a sense of what the reason is for members to want to specifically cut those parts of the IRA?
I think the direct transfer and direct pay provisions are below the radar screen. If the underlying tax credits are gone, then they don't really have much value. So they'll just be dragged along.
Got it. Let's talk about how sort of stakeholders can prepare in case there is a repeal of the tax credits. Keith, you mentioned that projects that are placed in service at the time the change in law occurs should be safe from that risk. Do you agree that there's kind of minimal risk if the projects have already been placed in service when there is a change in law?
Yes.
And what about,
by the way, there's no constitutional barrier against retroactive tax legislation, but the tax staffs, both Republican and Democrat, believe that's unfair.
and is there anything else developers can do if they are looking to construct in 2025? I guess, what are ways that they can manage that risk?
The last time the investment tax credit was rolled back by Congress was 1986. There were 3 general transition rules. You had a binding contract to build the project, if you had a binding offtake contract that required you to build it, or if you'd incurred at least 5% of the total project cost. Anybody who was not covered could go into the Joint Committee on Taxation staff and make a case that the project was too far advanced, it's unfair to pull away the tax credit. And there were 28 pages of so-called rifle shot transition rules, one-off rules for individual projects. There's no guarantee that process will work the same way. Don't be afraid if the initial vote is for no transition relief. The floor managers use those transition rules as a way to pick up votes.
Makes sense. Great. Well, why don't we talk a little bit about DOE, Jigar, since that's relevant to you and also DOGE. The DOE is an agency that many of us in clean energy know and rely on. The other, of course, is the IRS, and both have been facing pretty massive cuts from DOGE. I think I read that in mid-February, roughly 2,000 probationary employees at DOE were laid off. Would love to hear your thoughts on, how will these institutions be able to operate with a severely slimmed down staff, and what impact will that have on services?
Yeah, look, the Department of Energy is a very large institution, right? That covers all of the nuclear cleanup at Hanford, as well as the 17 national laboratories, plus all the folks who you interact with around the Loan Programs Office or the Office of Energy Demonstrations or some of the other grant making offices. I think when you think about what has really been decimated, the Office of Energy Demonstrations is lost a lot of their people. I'd say the Loan Programs Office has largely been left unscathed. I think you've got other offices that are in various forms of being dismantled. I'd say that look, I think the National Energy Dominance Council, right, which is Doug Burgum and Chris Wright, I think are generally level-headed folks who are trying really hard to figure out how we actually bring the collective expertise of our sector to be able to get us to energy abundance. But they're not often in charge, right? There's other people that are sort of like in the way. Like right now, for instance, there's this reduction in force mandate that's coming from the White House. It's not clear to me that what Chris Wright and Doug Burgum will do. I think they've been crystal clear that they don't think that more people need to be cut from their agencies, given how many people have already been cut. But, you know, like they might be forced to, right? I mean, that's sort of what the problem with being a cabinet secretary is. You sort of, you know, like take orders. You don't really necessarily give orders as much. And so we'll see where it goes, right? I mean, I don't know where this stuff goes, but it's very obvious to me that if you want to achieve some sort of electricity abundance, right, DOE has to play a central role in planning, right? I mean, letting projects randomly, you know, interconnect to the grid without some planning function or some, you know, overall like sort of thought process is a recipe for, you know, the most expensive way to achieve that goal. And you've already got a lot of pushback from people around electricity bills going up. And so I think a thoughtful approach is the approach that everybody wants to take, but we'll see if they're allowed to take it.
Keith, same question for you on the IRS. There's been significant cuts there. How will the agency be able to manage all these programs and ensure that there's proper oversight?
The IRS has 100,000 employees. 12,000 have been either laid off or took the buyout offer. There were rumors that they will cut 50,000 in total. The Deputy Treasury Secretary nominee denied that in a confirmation hearing last week. It is impossible at this stage to get any guidance from the IRS. That has been instructed by the Trump administration not to respond to any questions about IRA issues, and just to say the guidance speaks for itself. I think the IRS has gone overboard in scrubbing its Internal Revenue Manual. The Wall Street Journal reported that it excised whole sections that have words like equity or inclusion, even though in the tax world, debt equity and income inclusion are very common terms. So I just, at this point, the last point I'll make is the telephone directory for government agencies used to be printed. They stopped printing them in 2017. We operate a little like Nigeria. If you go to the airport in Lagos, you call somebody who might know somebody who might know somebody's number to find people to help. I just think it's not really functioning. The private sector in this country figures out how to function on its own to the extent it can.
I guess a related question is from the audience here. There was a scare a few weeks ago that the IRS, the Treasury pre-registration portal was shutting down. What happens if that gets shut down, even though the tax credits remain in force with the statute?
Well, I don't think it has shut down. It was impossible to access for a little while, just because I think they were scrubbing it of these proscribed words. But as far as I know, it's back up. We've had people who've gotten numbers recently, so I'm not that worried about it. There's a lot of sand in the gears in general, but it's not that.
Yep. Zooming out, Jigar, if there are these massive cuts of highly skilled career civil servants, how do we bounce back from that? You know, rehiring, retraining is not trivial. I know you did a lot of work to build up the LPO office, but how do you see these agencies bouncing back?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be very difficult, right? I mean, and frankly, like I think it's going to be very difficult for the technologies of the future, right? Whether it's nuclear or geothermal or others who need access to the debt from Loan Programs Office, they will have to wait until the Loan Programs Office is fully functioning before they can, you know, resume their trajectory to move forward, right? And that's unfortunate, but you know that elections have consequences, and when a president comes in office, you know they have the right to do these kinds of things to the agencies that they do it with. I think the bigger challenge, honestly, is the way in which our industry reacts to these things, right? I think the big problem I have with the way that our industry works right now is we don't act dominant, even though 90% of everything that get added to the grid last year in the US was clean, and 90% of everything that got interconnected to the grid last year globally was clean, right? And so we're in this weird spot where everyone acts fragile and not dominant. And I don't understand why they do that, right? We are clearly heading towards rolling blackouts if this stuff doesn't get interconnected to the grid, right? The National Electricity Reliability Council put out a report saying that MISO and SPP are headed towards rolling blackouts, right? And so like this is something that is a matter of national security and a matter of like just normalcy within the US government and the US people, right? And so we should be demanding the ability to provide energy abundance, right? And I feel like for whatever reason, we're like, well, but we're so used to this Byzantine approach that we do, and we work with Treasury and DOE and the IRS and all this other stuff. And if we don't get to do it that way, then I'm not sure what to do with myself. Just build the damn project. Just tell the people that you're selling power to, it's going to be $90 a megawatt hour, because that's what it costs, right? I don't understand why we are acting from a position of weakness. It doesn't make any sense to me at all.
And Jigar, what are some concrete ways that that we can be more dominant? So you're saying just build it, and people will come and pay for it. I guess what are ways to sort of act?
Yeah, you just go to all your customers and say, these risks are now yours, all of them. You want us to build this stuff? Great. Like, it's $90 a megawatt hour, and we'll just pass through whatever benefits we get, right? If we get them, great. If we don't get them, we don't get them. But ultimately, do you want us to build this stuff? Then that's how this works, right? It's your risk, not ours. We'll put all this stuff together. Oh, you don't want power? Okay, that's great. I'm going to go to the next person on the list who wants power, right? I just think that in general, we don't really know how to use our leverage. We're instead going like, no, that's not how it works. No one really needs us. We are so desperate for people to like, want us and love us and hug us. No, that's not the way this works, right? Like, we're adding everything to the grid that's getting added. When you think about like what it costs to build a new natural gas facility in Indiana right now, 1,436 megawatts for $3.36 billion. You can solve that entire problem with $400 million worth of batteries, right? So we're 1/8, right, the cost of what that natural gas plant is. Do they want to build it? Fine, but it's going to be a 22% rate increase to the people of Indiana, right? The batteries will be a lot cheaper. So like, I don't understand why we come to this going, I just don't understand why they don't love me. Just like, go in there and fight, get your projects done. You're doing the right thing. You're trying to help people with modern technology.
Keith, are you seeing any shift in balance of power? When you look at developers over the years that can demand more from their customers?
We are definitely seeing more demand for power. The situation has changed. I heard Blake Nixon, who's CEO of National Grid Renewables, say on a panel recently I moderated that for the first time in his life, people are coming to him trying to ask for power before he had to go knock on doors. So what Jigar described is very true.
Let's go to a couple of closing questions, and then we'll flip to audience Q&A. Let me start with Jigar. What's your most counterintuitive or maybe contrarian prediction for what might happen in the next 4 years in clean energy or energy in general?
Well, I think that, for a very long time, we were basically serving customers, right? So you sign a contract for a differences contract, you interconnect something out of the interconnection queue, right? The responsibility that you had for actually maintaining resiliency and reliability of the grid was zero, right? As long as you got through an interconnection study and someone said it was safe for you to interconnect, you did it. We're moving to a place where we now own the grid. Like, that's where this goes, right? So when someone says, hey, like, we want to do residential solar. For what purpose do you want to do residential solar? Well, the purpose has to be that we spend $54 billion a year upgrading distribution circuits. Half of that is not necessary and has resulted in most of the rate increases over the last 5 years, right? If you strategically put solar plus battery storage on certain circuits, you can avoid having to upgrade the system. But like, that is not the argument we make to preserve whatever the interconnection rules that we want at the Public Service Commission. The same thing is true with the distributed capacity procurement that Pierre Lafarge is doing with like Spark Fund with Excel Minnesota, right? Excel Minnesota is saying, here's the software, here's how we do this, and here's what we need, right? Right? Jason Wong is doing the same thing, right, with Southern California Edison, where he now can determine whether a load can get interconnected to a grid within 4 minutes because of the way that he uses Southern California Edison's data that they don't know how to organize, and AI, right? And he also can say, we can't do it, but if you add this much battery storage, then we can do it, right? That means that our sector is now responsible for, 6 nines reliability, right? Our sector is now responsible for affordability, right? Our sector has never been responsible for any of these things, right? But that's where we are, is we are actually responsible for all these things, right? And so one of the challenges that we have right now is we don't know what that means. Like, what is it? What is your responsibility of learning all the new companies at Powerhouses funding, right, that uses AI and does all this stuff in 4 minutes, right? What is your responsibility to understand what Pearl Street's doing with MISO, where they're actually doing all the interconnection studies in 4 minutes instead of 26,000 hours of GE and Siemens time, right? And like, we don't know, like, are we moving to fully curtailed contracts, right? So we go in and we just say, yes, we're going to do this stuff, but you can curtail us at any time, because if this becomes a problem, we have option value. We can just add batteries later to the projects, right? What changes do we want out of the RTOs, right? Like, if we have a 2014 project and we now want to add batteries to it, like, do we actually have to go through the whole process again to make that change? We shouldn't. Well, who's in charge of paying who what to get on the board of whatever organization to make sure that that happens, right? If we're not changing the actual interconnection, we're just using it more frequently. Instead of a 25% capacity factor, now it's a 40% capacity factor, right? These are all things that a mature industry actually takes full responsibility around doing, right? We haven't done that in the past, but that is what we're being asked to do. And if we don't do it, what'll end up happening is our markets will suffer.
Yep. And there's an economic opportunity there as well to provide those services.
Of course there is. Yeah.
Keith, over to you. What's your most counterintuitive or contrarian prediction?
I don't know if it's counterintuitive, but I'm watching for when the politics of electricity supply change. At some point, shortages become a brake on economic growth, and this will get truly all of the above. Relying on natural gas projects, which will take years to build, nuclear just aren't the answer to that. I think we'll have this become a political issue much, much faster.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome.
And that political issue comes from the governors, right? It's not national. It comes from governors who basically say, your monopoly franchise is at risk unless you interconnect these loads. I don't give a damn what you have to do. But like, it took me 4 years to get that group to like choose our state to build their manufacturing facility. You can't give them a 5-year interconnection timeline.
Yep. That's a recurring challenge that we've heard over the years.
Yeah.
If you had one wish list request for the new administration, what would it be? Jigar, over to you first.
Well, look, I mean, I think that America has invented almost everything that's cool and interesting in the energy sector over the last 45 years, right? I just think that for whatever reason, it was the policy of the United States, especially the Obama administration, but even administrations before that, to hand over all of our technology to other countries to scale up, right? We invented most relevant solar manufacturing technologies. We invented lithium-ion batteries, LFP batteries, et cetera. My one request is that we stop doing that. We start scaling this stuff up here. We learn how to do big things here. And if we don't want to do it here, we pick the countries that we want to scale it up in, right? Whether it's India or Mexico or other places. But I just think that it's weird to me that we invent everything and then we just hand it over to other people that manufacture so we can import it back.
Keith, over to you. What's your one wish list request?
I wish the administration would stop the smash mouth tactics. It's one thing to have a debate about policy, that's fine, but then just to punch people in the mouth and call them all sorts of childish names, I just don't think helps.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, I mean, uncertainty is the number one negative in business. I mean, if there's bad news, give us the bad news and just tell us what it is. But I think having uncertainty linger for 6 months, 9 months, or a year and have whiplash back and forth, I think it just makes it very hard for any business to plan, any developer to plan. These investments take, in the case of utility scale, multiple years to come to fruition. So you have to be able to plan. And I think, a lot of what we've experienced with the IRA is kind of this certainty that a program is going to be in place for a bit of a longer term rather than getting extended in 3 to 5 year chunks. And that was very exciting. And I think that sort of ushered in a lot of the very rapid uptake in clean energy over the last couple of years here. What do you think the economic impact would be of, one question from the audience, of, if the IRA is repealed to the full extent, how should we think about kind of what that impact will be on the economy?
Well, there's some projects that will be uneconomic without the tax credits. Offshore wind is an example. Perhaps the offshore
They
wind
might be
companies,
uneconomic with the tax credits.
they may be uneconomic with the tax credits. Let me walk back on offshore wind. People will figure out a way to build lots of things. They don't. The private sector functions if the government doesn't stand in the way in many cases. So I think the market will function. I think Jigar's right. The renewables are the low cost alternative. They will continue to move forward. I asked the CEO of a Spanish oil company who just hired 60 employees to work on renewables in the US whether that was a smart move. He said the car is moving forward. It's just a question of whether the federal foot is on the accelerator.
One last question from the audience. The corporate tax rate is currently 21%. There's been talk of moving it to 20%. On the campaign trail, Trump did mention that companies that manufacture in the US should be subject to a 15% corporate tax rate, which obviously would have a big impact on corporate tax receipts overall, a big cost. Any crystal ball on sort of what might happen to corporate tax rates?
I think there's a push and pull within the Republican caucus. There are probably as many members who want to increase it slightly to cover some of the other tax reductions as reduce it. I think the most likely outcome would be a reduced rate for domestic manufacturing, however you define it, and then perhaps a slight increase in the rate to pick up some revenue for the rest.
Jigar, any final thoughts?
I think that when you're as big as the clean energy sector is, you have to start taking responsibility for a lot more than these small sort of questions, right? I think we need to figure out a way to get our fiscal house in order. We have a lot of outstanding debt. When you have that much debt, right, and you piss off all of your allies, what happens is they don't want to buy your debt anymore, right? And if they don't buy your debt, then that means interest rates go up, right? Because, like if there's not enough buyers, then that means US Treasury bonds go up. And if US Treasury bonds go up, so do all your borrowing costs, right? And so it is in the clean energy industry's best interest to actually figure out how to reduce interest rates, right? That is a much bigger deal than tax credits and all the other stuff that everyone keeps like barking over. And for whatever reason, they don't seem to act very smart to me. Like half the people I talk to are just responding to whatever tweet that they read that day, right? Like as we grow up as an industry, which I don't know, at $500 billion, I would expect them to be pretty grown up. They should think through these bigger issues. And I think figuring out how we become fiscally responsible in this country, I think is important to having more predictable interest rates long term.
Well, thank you both for joining us today. This has been a fantastic discussion. One of our audience members did mention, Jigar, if you ever consider a side job as a stand-up comedian, I would surely attend a show. So you can take that as a compliment.
I've been watching too much Netflix, too many of those Netflix specials.
Can't thank you enough both for joining today. We really appreciate your insights, and we look forward to many more conversations as we navigate potential changes in 2025, and look forward to collaborating with you both on clean energy deals.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Andy. So long.